Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Adventures of a Real Estate Investor. I'm Susie.
And I'm Michael, and we're excited you joined us for this adventure.
So today's very special guest is Clif Luber. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, guys. I'm excited to be here. I feel like I've known you guys for years and years now, even though it's probably just been a little over a year and a half, but very excited to be on your podcast and very awesome to see how much traction you guys have had, both in real estate and with the podcast as well.
Absolutely, Cliff. Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. We're really excited that we finally got to make this work out and interview you. Because as Cliff mentioned, we've known each other for well over a year now, and actually met Cliff in the War Room Mastermind. And so basically, it's a mastermind for military members and veterans. They kind of get together and just chat about real estate. It's actually for like entrepreneurs, but most of the entrepreneurs in there are like real estate investors or whatever. And so I met Cliff. I was just going through like introducing myself. When the group was a little bit smaller, you can kind of like talk to everybody in there. And I was kind of going through and introducing myself to everybody and hopping on a call and chatting with everybody. And you know, after speaking to Cliff, who's also a fellow Service Academy graduate from the Naval Academy, and
Go Navy, though. Right.
Unfortunately for the Navy, the Air Force Academy is much better. But yeah. And anyways, chatting with Cliff, and we kind of had we were kind of in the same boat. We were in the similar, we had similar goals, and I decided, hey, you know what? I chatted with our partners, Susie, and then also our boots on the ground in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. I was like, you know what? I think Cliff would be a great addition to our team. When we were looking to take down our first property. And so Cliff came onto our team where we kind of all teamed up together, and we started looking for properties together. And since then we've closed on several properties together actually. And it's been just a pleasure getting to know Cliff. And you'll get to learn why in this episode, why exactly we think Cliff is such a special person and such a great addition. And just a great person to work with all around, just because he does focus on what we focus on, and he does look for the impact that he's making through real estate investing. So that's why we have him on the show. So thanks again, Cliff, for joining us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and the return on impact stuff, when you guys started bringing that up, I mean, I was just like, I bought in hard. I was like, wait, that is awesome. Like some idealistic people who are in real estate, and we've partnered with other people who are very similar to that, other people you've had on the show. And it's been a lot of focus of your guests, and that is really inspiring to me. And so the different ROI that you guys tell everyone about all the time is really, really cool. And I appreciate you guys bringing that to the real estate world. Really, really, really awesome. So thanks for having me again.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Cliff, could you please share with our listeners like your background and why you started investing in real estate?
Sure. Yeah. So originally from Missouri, went to the Naval Academy, like Michael mentioned, and graduated there in 2014. And so the last 7.5 years, ended up moving, I think living in 8 different homes over the last 7.5 years. And so there's a lot of moves throughout the military. I almost exclusively lived in very expensive markets. And so real estate was kind of this like, oh, well, someday, or I'll get to use my VA loan later. So my real estate journey kind of began when I just was choosing roommates, moving from place to place during training pipeline. And I was living in places for anywhere from 5 months to 8 months at a time, and then bouncing around. And but I never lived in an apartment that had less than 3 bedrooms. So we were always splitting rent and trying to save as much money as possible, splitting utilities, and trying to make it work that way. So when I lived in Charleston, Rhode Island, DC, Hawaii, always in places that were 3 bedrooms or more to try and save money. And that was kind of the only thing I could really do, because especially with only being there for a short period of time, it wasn't really enough time to use my VA loan and buy a primary residence and settle down. And I knew I was going to be moving after. And then even we'll get to Hawaii, and a condo that's 1 bedroom that's really old is $700,000. And it's like, okay, well, this isn't going to work, because even using a VA loan with no money down, you're looking at a monthly payment that is way above your basic housing allowance. And so that doesn't work. So we just crammed a lot of people into really nice places and with lots of bedrooms and save money that way. And then I saved up money on 2 different deployments that I went on when I was in Hawaii. So I was on a destroyer, went and deployed on the hospital ship Mercy during that tour, and then went to a submarine after that. I guess I should back up. I'm a Navy supply officer. So the logistics people for the other branches, and we kind of bounce around different communities in the Navy and kind of add value along the way, doing specific business management for the Navy. So I did that on a destroyer and a hospital ship, and then on a submarine out in Hawaii. And through those 2 deployments, I was able to save a little bit of money. So when I moved to DC, finally for shore duty at the Pentagon, finally bought a house. But because again, expensive markets, went in on it with a buddy of mine, and we split the down payment. And that would be Danny, who I would later start Upward Capital with. So we bought this house together in DC. He lived down the street, I lived in it. We rented out the other 2 bedrooms. And that kind of house hacking, that strategy, using that strategy, was kind of how we started. And we were like, okay, well, maybe it'd be cool to buy another place in DC, like one that Danny could live in. And given just how expensive the market was, we're like, well, we could buy one more place in DC and then we'd be totally out of money. So we started pursuing other opportunities and discovered that you could passively invest in apartments. And I was like, okay, I think we should look into doing that. So him and I created an LLC, which would later become Upward Capital, the business that we're running now. And we began investing passively in apartments. And we realized, okay, this is something that, especially we're finding deals where the minimum is a little bit lower. It was a little bit more accessible for middle-class guys like us and, mid-20s young professionals. And that was how I kind of got my start and started meeting the other GPs of the deals that I had invested in, like the ones that I didn't know. You have to have a connection to a GP usually for most of the syndications out there that are 5 or 6B. But I started meeting the other general partners that were on the team as well. And then started joining mastermind groups and eventually met Michael in the war room.
Yeah. That's awesome.
No, and it was cool too, because the very first conference that we ever went to, you were there. And so even that connection is pretty neat.
And we were all going to the Q&As afterwards too, and the follow-ups. And so I'd be joining, like standing on my lunch break at the Pentagon, like with the cylinders behind me outside, and you guys it'd be nighttime for you, doing those calls. And yet, so when Michael reached out, I was like, I've seen that guy on like 20 something Zoom calls, and I've seen his posts, and we're liking each other. We're commenting on stuff. We're liking each other's comments in the war room. Like, may as well talk. So it was a really good idea, Michael. Thanks for reaching out in the first place.
And it was crazy too, because even then you had a mustache. So when like I even met you like via Zoom the first time, I was like, this is not the same person.
Right.
I'm really confused.
Well,
no, that's all I remember you. Like that's ingrained at that bench in your uniform with the mustache.
It was a COVID stash. Yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah. That surprised my office too, when I took my mask off one day and they hadn't seen my face for 2.5 months. And they were like, oh goodness. Okay. Got it.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. No, that's good memory.
Yeah. Initially when I saw you at those meetings or whatever, like I thought you were like 45 years old.
Yeah, probably it did age me a little bit. That's for sure. Yeah, like I don't know. Is this guy retired? How is he only a lieutenant? That doesn't.
I literally thought you were retired from the military.
Yeah, everyone's asking me if I'm prior enlisted. Yeah, like are you a prior enlisted master chief or something?
Yeah. That's funny.
So that's when my real estate journey really began. Was when I had that COVID stash, and the virtual conferences popped up, Veterans REI Live, right, like you mentioned. And then really diving into the military real estate communities and seeing how many people out there in the military are kind of looking for, you can call it a side hustle, I guess, but it's more than that, right? It's not just a way to kind of make money. It's something to kind of pour some passion into. And real estate kind of became this thing that I was always very interested in as a passion project, and was finally able to dive into it with the extra free time that COVID kind of provided.
Absolutely. And just to highlight something real quick too, for all of our listeners out there who are, veterans or currently active duty military, like there's so many different avenues out there, and groups of people that you can kind of join that are like, military focused and, and also focused on real estate. There's like communities out there, like Clif and I met in a community like that, and also went to a, veterans real estate investing conference. Like it was just geared towards veterans, like to share all the different ways you can invest in real estate. So, reach out to Susie and I, or Clif as well. And we can definitely make sure that we can connect you with those specific groups for sure.
How did you end up going from passive to active? Like, what was that whole experience like? Is that when Upward Capital was born, or was that born when you were passive? And like, how did that all morph?
Yeah, so Danny and I invested in 5 different apartment syndications together, and kind of seeing the general partners that I had known, and they were people I had gone to the Naval Academy with, either in my class or a couple years older, and they were doing apartment syndications, and I was investing in their deals. And then I was like, well, what they're getting to do like is really, really awesome. Like they're able to help boost up a community. They're able to help, ensure that the apartment is safe by, boosting interior lighting, and they're fixing parking lots, and they're just making the community that they own, the property, just a better place to live. And I was happy to be an investor in those projects, but I think it was so cool that what they were able to do by meeting with the property managers and through the asset management process, after closing, just helping make create a community and make one better, and provide a really, your real estate, I guess, involves so many facets of society. Like it involves the school systems, it involves where people actually live and spend at least a third of their time, if not more, where kids are going to grow up and where they're going to remember playing. And then it just, it involves everyone's finances and life savings and just so many things that are really, really crucial to our lives. And so I felt like being able to have kind of that role as a general partner on the active side of real estate made me kind of want to shift over. And so I had started just telling people, hey, I've been investing in apartment syndications. And they're like, what the heck is that? It sounds like scam. I was like,
Right,
I promise it isn't. So that's why I had that video made that is on our website, explaining what a syndication is, just like 90 seconds, because no one had really heard of it. I was like, it's okay. I hadn't 6 to 8 months ago, but I started just telling people about it and realized that there was a huge interest to invest in assets like that from people specifically that I knew in the Navy. So we're not talking about incredibly wealthy individuals who have hundreds of thousands of dollars to invest and to throw around. But there are dual income, no kids, people who I know from the Navy who are saving to have kids soon, and they have a retirement plan that they've saved up and they want to invest that in something like real estate because at the beginning of COVID, the stock market kind of scared them. It scared a lot of people, and they want to find something maybe a little less volatile, and invest in syndications through their IRA, which is something that is really powerful and I didn't even know existed. And so that's something that a few of our investors do, both you guys and mine. And it's interesting just seeing how much of a strong desire there is to invest in apartments. And so very glad I started telling people about what I was doing. I kind of felt like I was spreading the good news, if you will. Like, hey, I found this like not very volatile, but kind of interesting. It's a private equity investment, really, when you're investing in an apartment deal. And usually investing in a private equity fund or something like that is only reserved for accredited investors, and the minimums are $100,000, $250,000. And I was like, well, I'm never, or at least for a long time, not going to be able to invest in something like that. But the fact that you can invest in apartment deals and have unaccredited investors is just absolutely huge. And so I wanted to help provide that accessibility to real estate investing by being a general partner. Long-winded answer for your questions.
No, that's okay. I like it. And there's a couple things I want to bring up, but I think like one that I didn't like bring up before, but it's been in the back of my mind is that we talk about how we want to make this like available to a wide variety of people, but you also said that you like created an LLC with Danny and invested with him. And like a lot of people don't think about that, right? Like they see these 100,000 ones and they don't ever think to ask or look further, like, hey, can I find ones that are lower? But like we've had those $50,000 minimums and people just ask to bring less. And if the numbers work, then it's been able to happen, where people can just bring $15,000 or $10,000. But even your example where two people can make an LLC together and then make that, minimum together and make it work. And that's huge too, because with that LLC, like you've then created a space where you can make this work. You just had to think of a different way, but you get the same returns that you would have if you would have just invested the 25 on your own, but now you've hit the minimum. You know what I mean? It's not like your investment changes or anything. You've just come up with a more creative way. And I don't even think that's talked about very often because I think that freaks people out. They're like, because it's hard for people to ask, right? A lot of people don't want to ask if they can do the minimum, just because so many people fear the word no, but so many times people will say yes. But if they do say no, it's also just like part of their business plan. Like ask someone else until they do say yes, because someone that you trust will tell you yes, and then it'll all be worth it.
Yeah. I totally agree. And yeah, us creating the LLC was something that we weren't really thinking super creatively about it, but they're like, hey, the minimum for this one syndication is $25,000. And I'm like, oh, okay. I don't think we're gonna be able to do it. It's an awesome, property in Savannah. It seems really great. I'm excited about it. Watched the webinar, looked through screenshots of the underwriting and everything. And one of the general partners who I knew from the Naval Academy, he was like, well, you guys could create an LLC. And I was like, okay, that's, automatically cutting the minimum in half, for everyone. And you obviously want to do that with someone you trust. And I was doing that with my best friend. So that made sense. And we had talked about wanting to do this for a long time. So we were ready and pulled the trigger on creating LLC. But yeah, that was our way of making it more accessible. And a couple of the other syndications we invested in was kind of at the 11th hour. Like they're wrapping up the raise. They have enough spot for one minimum investor, but they're like, hey, look, we're closing in a week. and we only have 25 grand open, but if you want to invest 10,000, that's fine. And we're like, okay, cool. And then that made it even easier for them to probably fill the remaining 15, right? So it's kind of a win-win where you're able to invest below the minimum. But we just had to communicate that, right? Because how could, the three of us as a general partner know that, oh, this person out there was interested in something less than the minimum, or they want to invest, but can't quite do the minimum. And for those out there who don't already know, and I know you guys have probably talked about it on your podcast, but you can only have 35 unaccredited investors per syndication deal. And so it's kind of, you have to kind of strategically map it out, like which funds are coming from accredited investors. So people have a net worth of $1 million or make more than 200,000 by themselves or 300 with a spouse. And, just ensure that you don't exceed that 35,000. But if you end up having more investments from accredited investors, or you complete the raise and you still have several spots left over, then you can afford to bring down the minimum. And so that's math that you and I, or all of us, were very willing to play. Like when we raised for Harper's Lodge, like a couple of weeks in, the minimum ended up lowering a little bit, right? Which I think was great. We were able to provide that investment opportunity for other people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford the initial minimum. So yeah, that it's crucial to know some of those opportunities, and to also, if you're interested in investing passively, to explain the limitations that you kind of have to the general partners that you're considering investing with. Because if they don't know, then they can't provide that last minute, opportunity. So I've had several friends who are like, hey, if you ever have a last minute window, of 10,000, 15,000, let me know, because I can't do 25, but would love to do less. So they're in my phone. I got the list, and I'm ready to let them know if we're finishing up a raise and they want to invest. And they've done it a couple of times now. The different people who've let me know.
Yeah, because even if you don't ask, the answer is always no, right? So like,
you
might as well try.
Exactly.
Yeah, and just right. One final point on that as well, Clif, is just like a lot of people who are kind of skeptical about the whole syndication thing, or like they're just, as they're trying to educate themselves on the whole process of like how syndication works, because it's not something that, everybody, I feel like a majority of the public is very familiar with the stock market, right? Like you buy, stocks of a company, and then you hopefully the company performs and you get paid, right? So like, right. And it, doubles your, whatever. So, but like syndication is a new thing for a lot of people, especially like real estate space, and it's not very accessible to a lot of people. But like this way is a very accessible way for people, number one. And number two, like if they want to dip their toe in and see how the whole process works, they can team up with some of their friends, or family, whatever, and they can, if it's $100,000 minimum, you can bring 25 each or whatever for 4 people, or if it's $50,000, five friends at $10,000, whatever, right? So you're not only getting the experience of understanding how syndication works, but also spreading out that risk across 5 people or 4 people or whatever you want to do. So yeah, I think this is a great opportunity, and it's really cool that you and Danny thought about that and were able to do that for sure. So.
But something else that I want to talk about, because I think it's super cool, is your hike.
Okay. Sure.
No, only because like one, it has to do, with like military members. And that's what I love about this community too. Like so many people give back, but they all give back in different ways. And because like we're super keen on like impact and how we can impact like not only like the residents in that community, like we can also impact communities like outside of our residents, and I think that's huge to talk about, because everybody has something else that they love. And so I'd love for you to explain that to our listeners.
Sure. Yeah. So diving into kind of the military real estate community that we've been talking about, I met a guy named Colby Bowers, who started the Veteran Pride Investment Group, and he lives out in Colorado. And Colby had also started a nonprofit. He's a retired Air Force medic. And then when he got out, started a nonprofit called the Paper Crane Foundation. And so just going to some real estate meetups with him, I had caught wind of the fact that he created a nonprofit and heard a little bit about what they were doing, which is basically the idea of doing adventure trips to do research for patients who have had PTSD and TBIs, specifically traumatic brain injuries. And they were gearing up to do their inaugural trip to hike to Everest Base Camp. But then COVID happened. And so all of that kind of got pushed to the right. And he had mentioned that they were going to Kilimanjaro now. And so I offered to essentially raise money for the trip, and then to also pay my own way to attend. And then I guess 3 months ago now, summited Kilimanjaro with the team. There were 7 of us, and we were able to, all of us made it up there. But throughout the whole, yeah, right. We all summited. Have to turn back. The summit's at 19,300 feet, I think. So the air gets really thin up there. But it was a really cool trip for several reasons. One, because it was a real estate kind of connection, right? And heard about someone in real estate who was taking a lot of their time to start a nonprofit and get that inaugural trip off the ground to build some momentum. And it was a lot of the other guys who attended the trip were other veterans that were either friends of his or he had met through the Marcus Institute. I believe it's Marcus Institute for Brain Health, but they had gone through that program together. It's a 3-week program, kind of an all-encompassing, medicine aspect where you're talking to psychologists, talking to pharmacists, talking to athletic trainers, and all kinds of different aspects of medicine that could help someone recover from TBIs and other post-traumatic stress injuries that they have. So it was really great to meet the other guys who were on the team who had all had TBIs in some capacity, whether they were a first responder or a veteran. And, getting to hear their stories, getting to know them personally, having them help push my butt up the mountain and making sure that when we were making the summit push at midnight and it was dark and 5 degrees out and windy, that I got up to the top of the mountain. But it was a really great trip. And that foundation that Colby Bauer started is only going to keep doing them with the momentum they've got. There's all kinds of articles that are being written about the trip and things like that. And it was great that, we eventually they're going to take researchers with them as well. But we were doing kind of our own research. So we were doing vital signs several times a day and looking at blood oxygen level, and everyone was taking diligent notes about how what symptoms they were experiencing and things like that. And, it was nothing unsafe or anything like that, but just certain things to monitor because there's not a whole lot of research of the effects of having had TBIs previously while at altitude and under stress. And so that's one of the goals and to help the Marcus Institute where these guys went through, help bring them back a lot of newfound research from their own trips that they do.
No, that's phenomenal. Round of applause. Like that makes me really happy.
Yeah, I was very inspired by Colby when he told me about it over the phone. And I was like, okay, that's something I'd love to be a part of. How can I help? And so that's how I ended up attending the trip and raising money for it as well.
Do you know how much all of you raised collectively?
I think the trip was somewhere around 65,000 to send 7 people. So yeah, so we ended up, so Colby did a lot of the raising himself for sure. He raises money for real estate, but raising money for a charity could be a little bit different because people aren't getting this there's no projected return really when you're donating to a nonprofit. That is a tough thing to do. And I applaud Colby for getting that trip off the ground and was happy to help play a part. And I definitely realized that, raising $15,000 for a charity trip is difficult and definitely will not take it lightly again. It took me several months, but luckily I had, dozens and dozens of gracious people that I both know and don't know. I got lots of donations from buddies' mothers and stuff who were like, oh, that's cool. And I'm glad my friends had sent it to their parents. $50, $100 at a time was able to raise the money to help. And that money essentially paid for 2 of the guys to go. And then I paid my own way for the trip. So it was pretty cool.
No, that is really cool. And I love that though, but I know that like a little part of it, because like so many of us give back in this space just because we can, right? Like you work like your regular job and then you have real estate, but like there is a surplus. And I love that majority of the people in this space like use that surplus for something good, right? Like it is hard to raise money for something that people can't see, right? But like to get there is really, really cool. And just to even do something beyond yourself is really, really cool. Because in this space, so many of us talk about like even an abundance mindset, like the more you give back to the world, the more the world will give back to you.
Definitely. No, I totally agree. And I think in hindsight, it's really, and I haven't reflected on the trip that much. I've been like meaning to kind of do that a little bit, personally, but I think looking back and seeing kind of the win those guys had getting to the top, like they were at points where they were in a long waiting list for a service dog, or they had service dogs and weren't able to get themselves around maybe, or just the various struggles they had gone through and that they would tell me about over the trip as I would get to know them. And then for them to climb the tallest mountain in Africa and the highest freestanding mountain in the world and one of the 7 summits, that's up there with Everest, like to be where they were a few years back and then be able to recover and end up where they are today is really, really remarkable. And, hearing a lot of these guys' stories of guys that they served with who didn't make it, who had maybe committed suicide since because they weren't able to recover from their injuries or, were just struggling in many facets after getting out of the military, having seen the stuff they saw in combat and things like that. It was definitely a humbling experience for me to see those guys thinking of their buddies while they're summiting Kilimanjaro and after the trip as well, and, kind of pouring one out for those guys and stuff like that. But then also just to see the recovery that the individuals I went on the trip with have made over the last several years. it was really, really inspiring. So I'm so glad that the Navy let me take off to go because it was a 2.5 week trip. Usually getting leave approved for that long is difficult. So I'm glad they let me go on the trip and travel kind of during COVID as well. But then also that I was able to participate and go climb it with them, not just raise money for them, to help support them from that way.
Yeah, no, I love that.
Yeah, that's really cool. And all of our listeners out there, obviously, I told you at the very beginning of the show, why you would hear why exactly we aligned with Clif and we decided to partner with him on some of these real estate deals here. And you heard it firsthand, like it's not all about real estate. It's not all about making money. It's also about, giving back, making an impact, on, the residents that we serve, on the communities, but also in our personal circles, right? So, and then giving back to charities however we can, and really helping those in need, especially in the military, after terrible things like TBIs and PTSD. So it's just really incredible, and that's exactly why we, like I said again, why we decided to partner with Clif, because he just aligned with our core values, and especially making an impact. So
thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, we're getting towards the end of the show, Clif. However, thank you so much for sharing that incredible story about raising money and climbing Kilimanjaro. I really look forward to learning more about this the charity in the future for sure. But it does bring us to the Adventurous 4 questions. These are the 4 exploratory questions we ask every guest. So the first question we have for you, Clif, is: where is one place you wish to travel to and why?
Yeah, I would probably say Australia. Never been, unfortunately. That's kind of like this, even though I was in the Pacific for several years, it's kind of this port visit that ships just hardly make. We do make it there sometimes, but never got to go, unfortunately. And my submarine actually had an Australian rider. So we had one of their submariners came over and rode ours for 2 months of our deployment. And my position was the CHOP, the supply officer. And he was like, "Chop, we got to get you down under, you got to come visit." And so he was just telling me all about it. And I was like, "All right, I'm in, I'll come." So eventually I need to go visit him and also see Australia accent after he was talking it up.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, I was stuck in a metal tube with him for 2 months. So you pick it up after.
Yeah, Aussies have the best chat too,
Oh goodness. Yeah, they're all the coolest people, every single one I've met. So I have to go. That's the big why. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. So the second question is: what is the number one thing on your bucket list, and how are you leveraging real estate investing to achieve it?
I don't know that I've ever thought about what's actually number one on my bucket list specifically, but one thing I dream about a lot, and I remember one of my roommates at the Naval Academy said, "Man, I feel like we're all just living one 3-day weekend to one 3-day weekend and just trying to get to these long weekends." So I think 3-day weekends are something that if I could write down my ideal month, it would have 3 or 4 of them in there. So trying to find a way to make every weekend a 3-day weekend, which I'd end up working on every one of those days anyway. But as far as not going into the office and things like that, and maybe COVID provided that for a lot of people in some ways, but I'd say finding a way to kind of use real estate to control your own schedule, right? Like, hey, I don't really take a whole lot of calls on Mondays because that's my time instead of doing the Sunday scaries, I'm doing like work on Mondays myself internally to try and get ready for what's going to come the next 4 days, or just building out your own schedule in a certain way that you can control your own time. And that's not something I'm able to do in the Navy right now. So it's a little far away, but something that I would want to leverage real estate investing to be able to do when I am no longer in the Navy and not in the military anymore, to be able to kind of control my own time a bit more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. And I like Sunday scaries. I've never heard of that, but I liked it.
Yeah. Well, everyone gets them and they're kind of frustrating and sad and scary, if you will. So
So the third question, Clif, is what is one piece of advice you have for someone who wants to start passively investing in real estate? I think we covered some things earlier.
Yeah, we covered that a lot. I would just say ask questions. Like if it's something, you read a friend's email about a real estate deal and you're like, well, I just don't even know where to start, then shoot them a text, ask to get on a phone call. Like, do not be afraid to ask questions, because they'll be very happy that you reached out and they can inform you. And I've had a lot of friends who would text me and say, "Dude, I don't understand this at all. Like, I'm just like, how exactly does this work?" And I was like, let's break it down. Let's talk about it, and they'd maybe invest in the next deal or the one after that, after breaking down the one that we were currently raising for at the time. So just ask questions. And that's the best way to vet the operator, to make sure that you feel comfortable with it, to know what the true left and right bounds are, like what's the real minimum investment, let's say, or how to wait kind of till the end of a raise when it's possible, and why those limitations are there, the SEC rules and compliances and things like that.
No, I like that. And then the fourth and final question is: If you had unlimited resources available to you, how would you leave an impact?
So I would say with kind of the inflation that we're experiencing now, finding a way to provide affordable housing is pretty near and dear to my heart, and it takes a lot of resources because the actual return on investment might be low, maybe, but the return on impact could be high, right? Taking your guys' kind of tagline. So I think finding ways to provide affordable housing, whether it's through development, finding some, there's a huge need for housing in this country, and unfortunately, in a way, 6%, some inflation, every cost of everything are going up. And so that's going to make affordable housing even more of a rarity. So trying to find ways to build that. And then the other thing is just finding opportunities to make real estate and investing as accessible as possible. So, and those usually take a lot of resources, whether that's setting up a Regulation A fund with a low minimum of $5,000 or something like that. Being able to make it as accessible as possible so as many people can invest in real estate as they like, even if they can't afford a down payment on their home, or more like me for 5 years living in a VA or having a VA loan, but living in a market that was too expensive to really make those numbers work, or not living there for long enough to be able to use the VA loan, would want to try and find a way to help make real estate as accessible as possible.
No, I love that.
Yeah. So before we wrap up the show, Clif, would you mind sharing with our adventurous family how they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. They can email me at clif@upwardcapital.us. And then they could visit upwardcapital.us and see our website there. They could join our email list. They could watch the 90-second syndication video, and they could see pictures of some of the deals we've done together as well, through the deal tiles that we have on there showing the investments that we've done already.
Perfect.
Yeah, and adventurous family, when you do connect with Clif, please let him know that you heard him on the Adventures of a Real Estate Investor podcast, and he will make sure to write you back. No. But Clif, thank you so much for joining us today. It's truly a pleasure. And hopefully we get to see you here on our side of the pond.
Yes, I hope so. Yes. The Navy is finding ways to get me over there, which is great to hear. So but thanks so much, guys, for having me on the podcast, and congrats on such a successful launch of the podcast and your real estate investing journey. And it's been awesome to take that journey with you guys so far.
Thank you.
Absolutely, Clif. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you as a partner. So thank you so much for everything. Until next time, explore more, adventure awaits.
Woo!